I am Julian, and I am 29 years old. 3 years ago, my entire world was shattered when I was thrown out of the only home I ever knew, labeled a common thief by my own flesh and blood. While I was standing there in our living room, stripped of my dignity and trying desperately to defend myself against a wall of lies, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "You are a parasite on this family's legacy, and you will not drag your brother down." They mocked my struggles, tore apart my bedroom like federal agents, and stripped me of my entire life savings right in front of my golden child brother and his perfect, smirking fiancé. They treated me like a criminal, throwing me out into the cold with nothing but a duffel bag and the clothes on my back. But there is one massive thing they did not know. The supposed stolen diamond ring never left the house. It was sitting exactly where she carelessly dropped it. And now, 3 years later, they are the ones leaving desperate voicemails, begging on their knees for my forgiveness. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I made them face their own cruelty, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments down below. Now, let us go back to where this nightmare actually began. It was a Tuesday evening, raining hard against the glass of my high-rise apartment windows. I was sitting at my kitchen island, looking out at the city skyline. I had a cup of black coffee cooling on the granite counter next to my open laptop. I was reviewing a quarterly logistics spreadsheet for my department. My life was finally quiet. It was organized. It was safe. Then the notification chimed. I glanced over at the screen, expecting an update from one of my warehouse floor managers or an automated alert about inventory levels. Instead, I saw a sender name that made my blood run instantly cold. A name I had actively blocked, deleted, and aggressively scrubbed from every avenue of my daily existence. Richard, my father. The subject line of the email was just 5 words long. "We need to talk." The ring. My stomach plummeted, dropping so fast and so hard I actually felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Just reading that word, the ring, sent a physical shockwave through my chest. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned stark white. For 3 long, agonizing years, I had built an impenetrable fortress around my life. I had moved on, built a lucrative career from absolute scratch, and scraped together a life I was deeply proud of. I had buried the memory of that humiliating day under mountains of hard work, late-night college courses, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that ensures a dreamless sleep. But those 5 simple words dragged me right back to the suffocating, immaculate hallway of my childhood home in Ohio. You see, family trauma does not just magically fade away because you get a promotion, a better salary, or a new zip code. It waits. It lingers in the background, hiding in the shadows of your mind until a single trigger pulls it right back into the light. Looking at that email, the ambient noise of the city traffic outside my window seemed to vanish. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt completely deafening. I did not click open the email immediately. I could not. I sat there, staring at the glowing screen, letting the dark memories I had fought so fiercely to repress wash over me in a tidal wave. I remembered the cold, disgusted look in my mother Margaret's eyes. I remembered the smug, victorious, almost predatory smirk on my older brother Garrison's face. I remembered the sheer, blinding injustice of being completely abandoned by the very people who were biologically wired to protect me unconditionally. They had cast me out into the world with a shattered reputation smeared in mud. They did not care if I starved on the streets. They did not care if I ended up sleeping in a gutter. To them, I was acceptable collateral damage. I was a convenient scapegoat used to protect the flawless, pristine image of their favorite son and his wealthy fiancé. I hovered my mouse pointer over the delete button. My index finger twitched. Part of me, the rational, healed part of me, wanted to send that email straight to the trash bin to keep my hard-won peace intact. But a deeper, darker part of me, the part that had survived 3 years of grinding poverty, surviving on dollar menus, and harboring relentless, burning anger, needed to know. I needed to know what could possibly possess the man who called me a parasite, the man who stole my college fund, to reach out to me now. I clicked open the email. The message was incredibly brief, almost frantic in its tone. It was a complete and utter departure from the stern, commanding, authoritative voice my father always used to dictate our lives. He wrote that they had made a terrible mistake. He wrote that the truth about the ring had finally come to light, that they knew I was innocent all along, and that they desperately needed to see me. He mentioned that my mother was inconsolable. He mentioned that Garrison was falling apart. They wanted closure. They wanted a family reunion. They wanted absolution for their sins. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed in my empty apartment. I closed the laptop forcefully, the sharp click cutting through the silence. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, crossing my arms over my chest, and watched the taillights of the cars flowing far below in the rain. The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. It was breathtakingly arrogant. They break you into a million jagged pieces, leave you bleeding out to sweep up the mess all by yourself, and then they have the nerve to show up years later expecting you to hand them a broom and a smile. It simply does not work like that. You do not get to destroy someone's life, assassinate their character to an entire town, and then demand a reset button when the guilt finally catches up to you. To truly understand why this single email felt like a live grenade rolling into my living room, you have to understand the family I came from. You have to understand the deeply toxic ecosystem that allowed them to throw their youngest son away without a second thought. The roots of this betrayal run deep. They are tangled in decades of favoritism, narcissism, and conditional love. The incident with the ring was not an isolated mistake. It was the grand finale of a lifetime of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. Let me take you back to the beginning so you can see exactly how the trap was set. Growing up in our large two-story house in a wealthy suburb of Ohio, there was a very clear, unspoken hierarchy. It was a caste system disguised as a nuclear family. At the very top was Garrison, and scraping the absolute bottom was me. Garrison is 3 years older than me and was, by all accounts, the chosen one. The golden child. He was the high school quarterback, the debate team captain, the charismatic kid who brought home straight A's without ever seeming to break a sweat. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on. My father, Richard, a man utterly obsessed with social status, optics, and climbing the corporate ladder, saw Garrison as his ultimate achievement. Garrison was the trophy he paraded around at country club dinners and neighborhood barbecues. My mother, Margaret, was even worse. She treated Garrison like a flawless prince. If Garrison wanted something, it materialized. If Garrison made a mistake, it was somehow someone else's fault, usually mine. I was completely different. I was quieter, more introverted, and deeply observational. I did not care about securing a country club membership or wearing the exact right brand of expensive polo shirts. I struggled a bit in the rigid structure of high school, pulling solid C's and the occasional B. I wasn't a bad kid by any stretch of the imagination. I never got in trouble with the law, I didn't do drugs, I just wasn't extraordinary. But in a family that treated being average as a severe moral failing, I was a constant walking disappointment. The disparity in how we were treated was baked into the fabric of our everyday lives. It was in the air we breathed. When Garrison got accepted into a highly prestigious out-of-state university, my parents threw a massive catered party in our backyard. They proudly announced to all their friends that they were gladly draining the family college fund to pay his exorbitant tuition. They bought him a brand new car as a going-away present. When I graduated high school 3 years later, there was no party. There was barely a dinner. I sat down with my father in his study and told him I wanted to attend the local community college to figure out my career path. My father steepled his fingers, looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, and told me I was entirely on my own. The college fund was an investment in excellence, Julian, he had said, his voice dripping with condescension. I do not invest my hard-earned money in sinking ships. If you want to go to community college, you will pay for it yourself. So I did. I got a job working part-time at a local supermarket, bagging groceries, collecting shopping carts in the freezing rain, and stocking heavy shelves until my back screamed. I saved every single penny, hoarding my meager paychecks in a metal lockbox under my bed to pay my own way. I didn't complain. I just put my head down and worked, Things in our house went from toxic to unbearable when Garrison met Vanessa. Vanessa came from old money. Her family had massive real estate holdings, a multimillion-dollar trust fund, and a lineage that my father practically drooled over. From the moment she stepped into our house, my parents treated her like royalty. She had this delicate, fragile persona, soft-spoken, always wearing expensive pastels, acting like a gentle breeze could knock her over. But I saw right through her carefully constructed act. I saw the calculated, cold way she navigated our house. I noticed the subtle, passive-aggressive put-downs she directed at me whenever my parents weren't looking. She would make snide comments about my supermarket uniform, or ask if I planned on stocking shelves forever. She made sure she was always the absolute center of attention. She and Garrison were a match made in narcissistic heaven. They fed off each other's arrogance. 3 years ago, they officially got engaged. Garrison proposed with a massive, vintage diamond ring that had belonged to Vanessa's grandmother. It was a flawless, ostentatious rock, incredibly valuable, and the entire family treated it like a sacred artifact. The engagement was the only thing my parents talked about for weeks. Wedding planning completely consumed the house. Magazines, fabric swatches, and catering menus covered every surface. Then came the fateful Tuesday that ruined my life. It was my day off from the grueling shifts at the supermarket. I was up in my room reading, grateful for a rare, quiet afternoon. Vanessa was staying over for the week to do some wedding planning with my mother. Margaret had just stepped out to run an errand to a local bakery, leaving just Vanessa and me in the house. I could hear Vanessa downstairs in the kitchen, humming a tune to herself as she washed some dishes in the sink. About 20 minutes later, the screaming started. It wasn't a cry of physical pain. It was a shrill, hysterical, blood-curdling shriek. I sprinted down the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs, thinking she had severely cut herself with a knife or that the stove had caught fire. I burst into the kitchen to find her frantically tearing through the contents of her designer purse, her face flushed angry red. "My ring!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the kitchen counter right next to the garbage disposal sink. I took it off to wash a greasy pan. I put it right there, and now it's gone. I immediately stepped forward to help her look. "Okay. Calm down, Vanessa. Don't panic. It has to be here. Did it roll behind the coffee maker? Did it drop on the floor?" She backed away from me as if I were holding a loaded weapon. Her eyes narrowed into slits, the fragile, innocent persona dropping instantly to reveal the venom underneath. "You were the only one here," she hissed, her voice suddenly low and dangerous. I froze, completely confused. "What are you talking about? I was upstairs in my room the whole time. I didn't even know you were washing dishes." "Don't play dumb with me, Julian," she yelled, her voice echoing sharply off the expensive tile. "You've always hated Garrison. You're insanely jealous of him and everything he has. You took it." Before I could even process the absolute, mind-boggling insanity of her accusation, the front door opened. Garrison and my parents walked in, returning from whatever country club lunch they had been enjoying. They walked straight into the kitchen to find Vanessa sobbing hysterically, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, and pointing a trembling finger right at my chest. Garrison immediately rushed to her side, wrapping his arms protectively around her shoulders. "Baby, what happened? Why are you crying?" "He took it, Garrison," she cried, burying her face in his expensive blazer, her shoulders heaving with fake sobs. "I left my grandmother's ring on the counter for 2 seconds, and he stole it. He stole my ring." The energy in the room shifted instantly. It was like all the oxygen was violently sucked out of the space. My father, Richard, stepped forward, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. Margaret clutched her pearls, a look of absolute disgust and horror washing over her features as she looked at me. "Julian," my father demanded, his voice low, lethal, and vibrating with rage. "Give her the ring. Right now." "Dad, I swear to God, I didn't touch it. I was upstairs reading a book. I haven't been in the kitchen since breakfast. I pleaded, my voice cracking under the intense pressure of their glares. I looked at my mother for any sign of support, any shred of maternal instinct, but she just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "How could you do this to your own brother?" my mother whispered, immediately playing the victim. "After everything we have given you, you steal from your future sister-in-law?" "I didn't take it," I shouted, the panic fully setting in. My heart was racing. I was trapped in a nightmare. Garrison stepped up to me, getting right in my personal space, his face twisted in a sneer. "You pathetic, jealous loser. You can't stand the fact that I have a real career, a beautiful fiancé, and a bright future, while you're a grocery boy. You thought you could pawn this heirloom to finally move out of this house? Give it back right now before I call the cops and press charges for grand larceny." They didn't even bother to look around the kitchen. They didn't check the floor, they didn't check the trash can, they didn't check the sink drains. They didn't ask a single logical question. The narrative was instantly set, and they were more than happy to cast me as the jealous villain. My father grabbed me forcefully by the arm and shoved me toward the hallway stairs. "We are searching your room. Now." I stood trembling in the doorway of my bedroom, burning with rage and profound helplessness, as my father and brother literally tore my sanctuary apart. They ripped my mattress off the frame, dumped all my dresser drawers onto the hardwood floor, and even smashed a framed poster on the wall looking for a hidden safe. They were treating my room like a federal drug raid. Then, my father pulled out the small metal lockbox I kept tucked deep under my bed. He grabbed a heavy hammer from his toolbox in the hall and smashed the lock open. Inside was a neat stack of cash, $800. It was every single dime I had saved from months of bagging groceries. It was my tuition fund for the next semester at the community college. My father held the stack of cash up like a victorious hunter holding a trophy. "What exactly is this, Julian?" "That's my savings for school, Dad. You know, I work at the supermarket. I've been saving for 6 months." I yelled, reaching for it. Garrison sneered, swatting my hand away. "Right? The kid who makes minimum wage just happens to have a stack of hundreds lying around in a lockbox. You already sold it, didn't you? You sneaked out and fenced the ring to some pawn shop." The logical leap was utterly absurd. I had been in the house the entire time. How could I have possibly sold a diamond ring in 20 minutes without a car, without leaving the property? But logic does not matter to people who already hate you. Logic does not apply to a family desperate to protect their golden child's narrative. "This money is going toward Vanessa's replacement ring," my father declared coldly, shoving my hard-earned cash into his pants pocket. He didn't even flinch. He looked me in the eye and stole my college tuition money to fund his favorite son's wedding expenses. "You can't do that. That's my money. That's my future," I yelled, stepping forward, tears of pure frustration stinging my eyes. My father pointed a stiff, authoritative finger right between my eyes. "You are extremely lucky I am not calling the police and having you dragged out of here in handcuffs. You are a parasite on this family's legacy, and you will not drag your brother down into the mud with you. You have 48 hours to pack whatever garbage is left in this room and get out of my house. You are no longer my son." The finality of his brutal words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Margaret stood in the hallway, crying softly into a tissue, not saying a single word to defend me. Vanessa peeked out from behind Garrison's broad shoulders, watching my entire life fall apart with a look of cold, detached, sociopathic satisfaction. I didn't wait 48 hours. I refused to spend another night under that roof. I packed my duffel bag right then and there. I threw in some clothes, my cheap laptop, and left the rest of my childhood behind on the floor. As I walked down the stairs and out the front door into the rain, the heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me. That sound, that sharp, violent click of the deadbolt locking, echoed in my head for years. It was the sound of my family completely and utterly erasing my existence. Walking down the long, manicured driveway of my childhood home with a single, heavy duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I felt a kind of hollow numbness I had never experienced before in my life. The bitter Ohio wind bit right through my thin denim jacket, but I barely registered the freezing cold. I had exactly $12 in my wallet, a cell phone battery hovering at 10%, and absolutely nowhere to go. My father had not just kicked me out. He had intentionally and maliciously crippled me financially by stealing my savings under the guise of confiscating criminal evidence. I walked for 3 grueling miles, my cheap sneakers soaking through with freezing puddle water, until I reached the small, run-down apartment complex on the other side of town where my best friend, Harrison, lived. Harrison and I had been incredibly tight since middle school. He was a mechanic at a local auto shop, a straightforward, blue-collar guy who couldn't care less about the toxic country club politics my family obsessed over. I knocked on his door, shivering uncontrollably. When he opened it and saw me standing there, pale, soaked, and looking like a stray dog, he didn't ask a single question. He just grabbed my arm, pulled me inside the warm apartment, locked the door, and handed me a dry towel and a beer. I broke down completely on his faded, uncomfortable floral couch. The dam broke. I told him everything. The insane accusation, the missing ring, Vanessa's fake tears, my father pocketing my college fund, and the brutal eviction. Harrison just sat there and listened, his jaw tightening, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his own beer bottle. "They're out of their damn minds, man," Harrison finally said, his voice thick with anger. "You wouldn't steal a pack of gum from a gas station, let alone a diamond ring. You can crash on this couch as long as you need. We'll figure this out." I ended up sleeping on that lumpy couch for 2 solid months. Those weeks were a brutal, unforgiving introduction to the harsh reality of basic survival. I lost my job at the supermarket because I missed 3 shifts in a row trying to figure out how to eat, where to shower, and how to stop my hands from shaking. I hit the pavement every single day, applying to every fast food joint, gas station, and retail store in a 10-mile radius. But I quickly learned that a wealthy small town is a vicious, unforgiving place when it comes to gossip. My parents and Garrison had not kept the incident quiet. Far from it. They actively played the role of the tragic, betrayed, heartbroken family to absolute perfection. They told everyone at their HOA meetings, the country club dinners, and the local diners that I had stolen Vanessa's priceless family heirloom to fund a secret drug habit. I found this out the hardest way possible. One afternoon, I ran into Timothy, a guy I had played varsity baseball with in high school. He was walking out of a local pharmacy. I was desperate for a friendly face, so I smiled and went to shake his hand. Timothy took a sharp step back, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Keep your hands where I can see them, Julian," Timothy sneered loudly, drawing the attention of people in the parking lot. "I heard exactly what you did to your brother and his fiancé. You're pathetic. If you're looking to borrow money for a fix, look somewhere else. Don't ever talk to me again." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the parking lot, my face burning with intense humiliation. My own family had systematically poisoned the well. They had made sure that my reputation in my hometown was completely destroyed, isolating me from any potential support system. They didn't just want me gone from their house. They wanted me socially punished. They wanted to ensure I failed to prove their narrative right. The profound sadness I felt quickly curdled. The anger became a living, breathing thing inside my chest. It woke me up in cold sweats at 4 a.m. It burned in my throat when I ate cheap ramen noodles for dinner. But eventually, after weeks of wallowing, that anger hardened into something else. It hardened into high-octane fuel. I realized, sitting on that couch in the dark, that absolutely nobody was coming to save me. There would be no dramatic rescue. There would be no sudden realization or apology from my parents. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to eat, I had to become ruthless about my own future. I expanded my job search far beyond the town limits. I finally landed a job at a massive logistics warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the county, right on the border where the country club gossip hadn't reached. The work was physically grueling. I was assigned 12-hour overnight shifts standing on a concrete floor, moving heavy wooden pallets, breathing in cardboard dust, and dealing with floor managers who treated the workers like disposable barcodes. My body ached in ways I genuinely didn't know were anatomically possible. My hands grew thick calluses, my lower back throbbed a dull ache constantly, and I would collapse onto Harrison's couch every morning completely drained of life. But every single Friday, a paycheck hit my newly opened, independent bank account. It wasn't a massive amount of money, but it was mine. My father hadn't handed it to me with strings attached. Garrison couldn't look down his nose and claim he was better than me because he had a corner office. This money was my blood, my sweat, and my tears. I saved aggressively. I stopped buying anything that wasn't strictly essential for biological survival. I bought my clothes from thrift stores. After 3 months, I moved off Harrison's couch and rented a tiny, windowless room in a boarding house near the warehouse. It was barely the size of a walk-in closet, and the old radiator clanked aggressively all night. But when I walked in and locked the deadbolt, it was my absolute sanctuary. I didn't stop there. I started using the free Wi-Fi at a local public library to resume my education. I couldn't afford traditional university tuition anymore, so I researched and enrolled in a highly respected, intensive online business and supply chain management program. My routine became monastic. I worked 12 brutal hours at the warehouse, ate a cheap turkey sandwich, and stared at my laptop screen, studying complex logistics algorithms until my eyes blurred and watered. I was becoming a ghost. I didn't go out to bars. I didn't date. I just worked, studied, and slept. I was driven by a singular, obsessive, burning thought. I was going to become so incredibly successful, so financially untouchable, that my family's lies would bounce off me like bullets hitting Kevlar armor. I was going to build a life so solid, so undeniable, that they could never, ever break me again. There were incredibly dark moments, of course. The holidays were absolute psychological torture. I remember sitting in my cramped, freezing room on Thanksgiving, eating a processed turkey meal from a gas station microwave, staring at the peeling yellow wallpaper. I knew, without a doubt, that my family was sitting around our massive mahogany dining table, carving a pristine, golden turkey, laughing, drinking expensive imported wine, and celebrating Garrison's upcoming wedding. I knew they probably didn't even mention my name. I was completely erased from their history, but the searing pain of being erased slowly, methodically transformed into the sheer power of being invisible. They had no idea what I was building in the dark. They had no idea the monster of ambition they had created. 2 years passed. 2 years of relentless, agonizing, unyielding grind. At the warehouse, I didn't just do my assigned manual labor. I actively learned the entire operation from the ground up. I used the knowledge from my online business courses to study the facility's supply chain. I figured out exactly where the logistical inefficiencies were, why shipments were delayed, and I started unofficially optimizing the forklift and pallet routes during my overnight shifts. My insane work ethic and sudden spikes in sector productivity quickly caught the attention of the upper floor managers. But it also painted a massive target on my back. Enter Marcus. Marcus was a senior floor supervisor who had been lingering at the warehouse for a decade. He was a classic corporate bully who maintained his middle management position through intimidation, yelling, and taking credit for other people's work, rather than actual competence. He saw my rapid efficiency and quiet intelligence as a direct, existential threat to his lazy management style. Marcus started deliberately assigning me the absolute worst shifts. He gave me the heaviest loads, the most broken down, malfunctioning forklifts, and the aisles with the worst lighting. He would constantly try to provoke me into a reaction, making snide, derogatory comments about my quiet demeanor. "Think you're better than us, college boy?" Marcus would sneer, deliberately kicking over a meticulously organized stack of heavy boxes I had just spent an hour sorting. "You're just a grunt. Remember your place." The old Julian, the terrified kid who cowered when Garrison yelled in the kitchen, might have snapped, thrown a punch, or simply quit in tears. But the new Julian was ice cold. I didn't argue with Marcus. I didn't raise my voice. I documented everything. I built a meticulous, heavily detailed log of his OSHA safety violations, his wildly inefficient employee scheduling, his extended unauthorized breaks, and the thousands of dollars in ruined inventory his direct negligence caused on a weekly basis. I compiled spreadsheets, cross-referenced inventory logs, and built an undeniable case. When the time was exactly right, I didn't go to Marcus to complain. I bypassed him entirely. I put on my only cheap suit and requested a formal meeting with the facility director, Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell was a no-nonsense, results-driven executive who cared about the bottom line, profit margins, and efficiency. He despised warehouse politics. I walked into his spacious office, placed a professionally bound, 50-page report on his mahogany desk, and laid out exactly how the current floor management under Marcus was bleeding the company dry. I didn't just complain. I presented a fully restructured logistics plan that my data proved would cut loading times by 15% and reduce damaged goods by a third. I didn't rely on emotion. I relied on hard, undeniable data. Mr. Caldwell reviewed the report in silence for 20 minutes. He looked up at me, taking in my cheap suit and steady gaze, and nodded once. He fired Marcus by the end of that very week. The following Monday, Mr. Caldwell called me back into his office. He didn't just thank me. He formally offered me the position of operations manager for the entire night division. It came with a massive salary increase, a proper private office, a generous 401k match, and full corporate health benefits. Walking out of Mr. Caldwell's office that day, I felt a massive, seismic shift in my universe. The promotion wasn't just about the money, though the money was life-changing. It was absolute validation. I had faced down a bully, used my intellect, stayed disciplined, and won. I had definitively proven that I was not the weak, useless parasite my father claimed I was. I was a force to be reckoned with. With my new, substantial salary, my standard of living changed rapidly. I finally moved out of that depressing boarding house and leased a clean, modern, one-bedroom apartment in a highly secure building in a good part of the city. I bought my first real car, a reliable, sleek, brand-new sedan, paying the hefty down payment in straight cash. I remember walking into the dealership, confidently signing the financial paperwork, and driving off the lot. I gripped the leather steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Nobody bought this for me. Nobody co-signed the loan. Nobody could ever take it away from me. Through it all, I maintained complete and total radio silence with my family. I had changed my phone number long ago and blocked their emails on my old accounts. As far as I was concerned, Richard, Margaret, Garrison, and Vanessa were dead. But Harrison, who still lived in our hometown and ran a highly successful auto shop, occasionally heard whispers through the local grapevine. We stayed incredibly close. He was the brother I actually chose. One evening, about 6 months into my new management role, Harrison and I were having a cold beer on my new apartment balcony, looking at the city lights. Harrison took a sip, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me sideways. "So, funny story from the old neighborhood," Harrison mentioned casually, keeping his tone light. "Your folks are doing some major, expensive renovations on the old house. Having massive plumbing issues, apparently. I heard from a contractor buddy of mine that their whole kitchen sink system backed up a few days ago. Smelled like a swamp for a week. They had to call in emergency plumbers to rip apart the pipes." I felt a strange, cold prickle on the back of my neck, a bizarre sense of déjà vu, but I quickly brushed it off. I took a drink of my beer and looked out at the skyline. "Couldn't happen to nicer people," I replied dryly. "Hope it costs them a fortune." I genuinely didn't care about their plumbing. I didn't care about their house. I was focused entirely on my own upward trajectory, my stock portfolio, and my career. I was standing right in the eye of the storm. My life was finally peaceful, orderly, and entirely under my strict control. I was highly respected at work. I had real money in the bank, and the terrifying nightmares about that terrible Tuesday were finally starting to fade into oblivion. I thought the worst of my life was firmly in the rearview mirror. I thought the past was dead and deeply buried. I was so incredibly wrong. The past wasn't dead. It was just stuck in a pipe, waiting to be pulled out into the light. I sat in my apartment for 3 full days before I finally replied to my father's email. I did not rush. I did not let their sudden, frantic urgency dictate my schedule or my emotional state. For 3 years, they had operated under the absolute assumption that my time, my feelings, and my existence were entirely worthless. Now they were on the outside looking in, desperately knocking on a door they had permanently nailed shut. I let them sweat. I went to work, I attended my management meetings, I went to the gym, and I lived my life. When I finally sat down at my laptop and typed my response, it was brief, completely devoid of any emotional warmth, and read exactly like a cold corporate summons. I agreed to meet them, but it was going to be entirely on my own terms. I refused to go back to our hometown. I refused to step foot in that house or anywhere near their precious country club where they had systematically destroyed my reputation. Instead, I chose a neutral, highly specific location. An independent, upscale coffee shop located 2 towns over. I picked this exact place because it was far enough away that we would not run into anyone from their elitist social circle, ensuring they could not put on a fake public performance for their friends, but it was public enough that they could not scream, manipulate, or cause a scene without drawing the attention of strangers. I told them I would be there at exactly 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. I explicitly stated that I would only give them 30 minutes of my time, and if they were late, I would leave. Sunday arrived. The Ohio weather was crisp and clear, the kind of sharp autumn afternoon that usually signaled high school football games and family barbecues. I woke up early, made my coffee, and dressed with meticulous, calculated precision. I did not wear the cheap, faded supermarket hoodie or the worn-out denim jeans they remembered me in. I wanted to visually obliterate the pathetic image of the helpless younger brother they had burned into their minds. I put on a tailored charcoal blazer that fit perfectly, a crisp, high thread count white button-down shirt, dark fitted slacks, and a pair of expensive leather shoes. I strapped on the high-end watch I had recently bought myself to celebrate my latest quarterly logistics bonus. I looked in the mirror before I left. The man staring back was not a victim. He was a highly successful operations manager who handled a multi-million-dollar corporate budget, managed dozens of employees, and commanded respect. I was ready. I arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee, tipped the barista, and deliberately chose a large, heavy wooden table in the far back corner of the room. I sat facing the large glass entrance doors. I wanted the tactical advantage of watching them walk in. I wanted to observe their raw body language before they even realized I was in the room. I wanted to see exactly how 3 years of living a lie had aged them. At exactly 1:55, a pristine, fully loaded silver SUV pulled into the parking lot. I watched through the plate glass window as all 4 of them stepped out onto the pavement. My father, Richard, my mother, Margaret, my older brother, Garrison, and his wife, Vanessa. Seeing them in the flesh after 3 years of absolute silence was a bizarre, almost out-of-body experience. In the darkest corners of my nightmares, they were towering, terrifying monsters who held absolute power over my destiny and my self-worth. But looking at them walking across the asphalt in the afternoon sun, the illusion completely shattered. They just looked small. They looked incredibly ordinary, fragile, and deeply exhausted. Richard's hair, which used to be thick and perfectly styled, had thinned out significantly, and the gray at his temples had completely taken over his entire head. He walked with a slight, hesitant stoop, having completely lost that arrogant, chest-out, commanding posture he used to carry around like a weapon. Margaret looked worn down to the bone. She was dressed in one of her signature expensive cashmere sweaters, but the high-end designer clothes could not hide the deep, prominent lines of stress etched around her mouth and eyes. Garrison, the ultimate golden child, the high school quarterback, looked bloated and soft. The sharp, athletic jawline that my parents used to brag about was gone, replaced by the distinct puffiness that comes from entirely too many expensive dinners, high-stress corporate hours, and entirely too much whiskey. Vanessa walked slightly behind Garrison, nervously clutching her expensive designer handbag to her chest like a protective shield. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the parking lot. The little bell above the coffee shop door chimed brightly. They stepped inside and immediately scanned the crowded room. When Richard's eyes finally swept over the back corner and locked onto mine, he physically flinched. He literally took a half step backward. He did not recognize me at first. I could see the exact, precise moment his brain finally registered that the confident, sharp-looking, imposing man sitting in the corner was the same son he had violently discarded. They walked over to my table with hesitant, incredibly slow steps. It looked like they were walking to a funeral. Nobody spoke immediately. The silence hovering over the table was thick, heavy, and suffocating. "Julian," my father finally said, his voice completely lacking its usual booming, intimidating authority. It sounded reedy. It sounded weak and incredibly unsure. "Thank you for agreeing to see us. We know this is hard for you." I did not stand up to greet them. I did not offer my hand for him to shake. I simply kept my hands folded on the table and gestured to the 4 empty wooden chairs across from me. "You have exactly 28 minutes left," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "Sit down." Margaret immediately burst into tears the very second she pulled her chair out and sat down. It was the same theatrical, manipulative crying she had used my entire life to control every narrative in our house. She reached across the wide table, desperately trying to grab my hand. "Oh, my sweet boy," Margaret sobbed loudly, ignoring the stares of a few customers at the next table. "You look so different. You look so incredibly handsome and grown up. I have missed you every single day, Julian. My heart has been completely broken." I smoothly and deliberately pulled my hand back, entirely out of her reach, and took a slow, methodical sip of my black coffee. I set the mug down firmly. "Stop the performance, Margaret," I said coldly. The use of her first name hit her like a physical slap across the face. She gasped, covering her mouth. "We are not doing the emotional, tearful family reunion routine today. I am not here to play a part in your stage play. Richard's email specifically said you needed to talk about the ring. So, stop crying, look at me and talk." My father cleared his throat loudly, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He tugged at the collar of his shirt, looked over at Garrison, and then finally brought his eyes back to me. He folded his hands tightly on the table, leaning forward slightly. "3 weeks ago," Richard began, refusing to maintain direct eye contact with me for more than 2 seconds at a time, "your mother and I decided to finally remodel the kitchen. The sink had been draining incredibly poorly for months. It was always backing up. It finally clogged completely right before a dinner party. We had to call an emergency plumbing company. A man named Gary came out. He tried to snake the drain, but he ended up having to dismantle the entire piping system under the floorboards because the blockage was wedged deep in the main line trap." My father took a shaky, deep breath, his hands visibly trembling. "Gary found something wedged in the lower U-trap of the garbage disposal pipe, right below the grinding blades. It was completely mangled, chewed up by the disposal, and covered in years of grime and grease, but the main diamond was still firmly intact." He reached a shaking hand into his expensive jacket pocket, pulled out a small, clear plastic evidence bag, and placed it gently on the center of the wooden table. I looked down at it. Inside the bag was a twisted, ruined, unrecognizable piece of platinum metal and a dull, heavily scratched diamond. "It was the engagement ring," Garrison said quietly, speaking for the very first time. His voice was hollow. He stared blankly at the plastic bag on the table. "It never left the house, Julian. It fell down the drain." Margaret sobbed even louder, burying her face completely in a paper napkin. "We were so incredibly wrong, Julian. We were so wrong. We blamed you, we destroyed your life, and you were completely innocent the entire time. I have not slept a full night since Gary the plumber handed us that bag. The guilt is absolutely eating me alive. I see your face every time I close my eyes." Richard looked up, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "We failed you as parents, Julian. I failed you as a father in the worst possible way a man can fail his own son. I allowed my emotions, the intense stress of the wedding planning, and the chaos of the moment to completely blind me to the truth. We came here today to beg for your absolute forgiveness. We want you to come back home. We want to be a family again, to put this horrible nightmare behind us. Whatever you need to make this right, whatever financial compensation you want, I will write the check right here, right today." They sat there, staring at me with desperate, pleading, expectant eyes. They were waiting for the Hollywood ending. They were waiting for the prodigal son narrative. They fully expected me to break down, cry with them, accept their apologies, forgive them unconditionally, and step right back into my assigned role as the inferior, compliant younger brother. They honestly believed they could simply buy their way out of 3 years of absolute hell with a sad story about a plumber and a checkbook. I looked at the mangled ring in the plastic bag. I looked at Margaret's fake, theatrical tears, designed to make me feel sorry for her. I looked at Richard's desperate, pathetic attempt to throw money at the situation to regain control. And I looked at Garrison, who couldn't even look me in the eye. I did not feel relief. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel the sudden rush of love and forgiveness they were banking on. I felt an absolutely freezing, calculating, white-hot rage. Because looking at this table, looking at the dynamics playing out right in front of me, I knew they were still lying by omission. "So, let me make sure I have this entire timeline perfectly straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level, cutting through Margaret's sobs. "The ring accidentally falls down the drain. You immediately decide, without a single shred of actual evidence, that I am a master thief. You violently destroy my bedroom. You publicly humiliate me. You smear my name to everyone in our hometown, ensuring I cannot get a local job or even walk down the street without being called a junkie. You throw me out onto the freezing street with exactly $12 in my pocket. You leave me to freeze, to starve, and to fend for myself. And you genuinely think a cup of coffee and a sad story about a clogged pipe fixes 3 years of trauma." "Julian, please try to understand," Garrison pleaded, finally looking up, his face pale and miserable. "We were under a massive amount of pressure. The wedding was huge. Vanessa was completely hysterical. We made a terrible mistake in the heat of the moment." I slowly turned my intense gaze away from my brother and locked eyes directly with Vanessa. She had been completely, absolutely silent the entire time, trying to shrink into the heavy wooden chair and become entirely invisible. "Let's talk about Vanessa," I said softly, the tone of my voice causing everyone at the table to freeze. I leaned forward slowly, resting my elbows firmly on the table, keeping my eyes fixed intensely on my sister-in-law. The ambient noise of the coffee shop, the loud espresso machines hissing, the soft chatter of other customers, the jazz music playing over the speakers, seemed to fade away completely into a dull hum. I was in full, undisputed control of this table. I was the interrogator, the judge, and the jury, and they were firmly trapped on the witness stand. "Vanessa," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through solid glass. "Look at me." She hesitated, her breathing shallow. Her eyes darted frantically to Garrison for protection, a silent plea for her husband to step in and save her. But Garrison was staring at his own hands, paralyzed by the tension. She finally brought her gaze up to meet mine, her eyes wide with genuine, unadulterated fear. "You told everyone, repeatedly and hysterically, that you left the ring sitting on the kitchen counter," I stated, laying out the undeniable facts methodically, step by step. "But the counter where you claimed you left it is a solid 2 feet away from the sink basin. An inanimate, heavy platinum object does not suddenly grow legs, walk 2 feet across a granite countertop, and throw itself down a garbage disposal. So, Vanessa, I want you to tell me exactly how it got into that specific drain." Vanessa swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking so violently that her heavy designer bracelets clinked against each other. I must have bumped it. It was a complete accident. I was washing a very heavy roasting pan, and it must have just slid off the counter and fallen in while I was distracted. A heavy vintage platinum ring, sliding 2 feet across a flat surface? I asked, raising a single eyebrow, my voice dripping with absolute sarcasm. That literally defies the basic laws of physics. Let's try the actual truth. You took the ring off. You put it on the narrow, wet ledge right on the immediate edge of the sink basin. You were scrubbing a pan. Your hand slipped. You knocked it in. But here is the really interesting part about that scenario, Vanessa. I paused, deliberately letting the suffocating silence stretch out, watching her physically squirm in her expensive clothes. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the anxiety I had felt for 3 years. A heavy metal ring dropping into a hollow stainless steel sink basin makes a very distinct, very loud, very sharp noise, I said slowly, enunciating every word. It makes a sharp, unmistakable clink. And if it falls down the drain and hits the metal grinding blades of a garbage disposal, it rattles loudly. You were standing right there. Your hands were right there. You heard it fall. Vanessa's face completely drained of all color. She looked like all the blood had rushed to her feet. She looked like she was going to be physically sick right there on the table. Margaret completely stopped crying, her tissue hovering in midair, as she looked at her daughter-in-law in total confusion. "Julian, that is enough." Garrison tried to intervene, puffing his chest out in a weak, pathetic display of authority. "She made a mistake. Don't interrogate my wife." "Shut up, Garrison," I snapped instantly, not even bothering to look at him. I kept my eyes locked dead on Vanessa. "You heard it fall, didn't you, Vanessa? You knew exactly where it went the entire time." Vanessa's lower lip trembled violently. The fragile, innocent, perfect facade she had maintained for years completely shattered into a million pieces. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice cracking, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "I heard it hit the metal. I heard the clink. I looked down the dark drain, but I couldn't see it. I tried to reach my fingers in, but it was gone past the blades." The table went absolutely dead silent. Richard stared at Vanessa with his mouth slightly open, in absolute paralyzed shock. "So why didn't you just tell everyone it fell down the drain?" I pressed, absolutely relentless, refusing to let her off the hook. "Why intentionally blame me? Why start screaming that I was a thief?" Vanessa burst into ugly, real, hyperventilating tears. She pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at Garrison. "Because of him. You know exactly how he gets. He is obsessed with perfection. That ring belonged to my grandmother. It was a priceless heirloom, and his parents spent thousands of dollars getting it resized, appraised, and insured. If I told him I was stupid and careless enough to knock it down a garbage disposal, he would have lost his mind. He would have screamed at me for hours. He was already so intensely stressed about the wedding budget and the planning. Panicked. I was absolutely terrified of his temper. The first major truth bomb detonated with devastating force right in the middle of the table. Vanessa had known all along. She had heard the ring fall into the plumbing. But she was so inherently cowardly, so terrified of her perfect, golden child fiancé's legendary narcissistic rage, that she consciously, deliberately chose to ruin an innocent man's life instead of facing the consequences of her own clumsiness. She threw me to the wolves, allowed me to be homeless, just to save her own skin from an argument. Garrison looked at his wife in pure, unadulterated horror. His entire worldview was collapsing in real time. "You knew," he whispered, his voice shaking with betrayal. "You let me kick my own brother out of the house. You let me threaten to call the police on him. You let me destroy our family. And you knew it was in the drain the whole time? I couldn't tell you the truth. You would have hated me. You would have called off the wedding." Vanessa sobbed defensively, trying to grab his arm, but he violently pulled away. I let out a harsh, dry, incredibly bitter laugh. Wow, the absolute perfect couple, built on a rock-solid foundation of absolute lies, cowardice, and throwing other people under the bus. You two truly deserve each other. I turned my attention away from the crumbling, pathetic couple and focused my deadly, unwavering gaze on my father. Richard was sweating profusely, loosening his expensive silk tie, looking like a man facing a firing squad. "But we are not done yet," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming cold and authoritative. Let us talk about the money, Richard. My father physically flinched, holding his hands up defensively. Julian, please. I already said I will write you a check for whatever you need. I will give you $50,000 today. Just name your price and we can move past this. I don't want your filthy money, I said, leaning closer across the table, invading his space. I want the truth. When you broke into my room like a thug and smashed open my lockbox with a hammer, you took $800. That was my tuition money. You explicitly, loudly stated to everyone in the room that you were taking it to pay for a replacement ring. But we both know that vintage diamond was fully insured. You did not need cash for a replacement. The insurance company would have cut a massive check. So, where did my $800 actually go? Richard looked like a trapped animal. He looked left, he looked right. He looked at Margaret, silently pleading for his wife to jump in and save him from this humiliation. But Margaret was staring blankly at the table, her face completely pale, refusing to meet his eye. Tell me, Richard? I demanded, slamming my palm flat onto the wooden table, making the coffee cups jump. Or I walk out that glass door right now and you never see my face again. My father closed his eyes in deep, agonizing shame. When he slowly opened them, the arrogant, controlling patriarch was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic, weak old man. The wedding, he whispered hoarsely, his voice breaking. The wedding went severely over budget. The florist demanded an extra $1,000 in cash on the day of the delivery because Margaret changed the massive floral arrangements at the absolute last minute. We had completely maxed out the credit cards trying to keep up appearances. We didn't have the liquid cash. The second twist hit me, but it did not surprise me. It only confirmed every dark, cynical suspicion I ever had about the true nature of these people. You stole my community college tuition money, I said, emphasizing every single word with venomous clarity. To pay for Garrison's wedding flowers. We were completely desperate, Margaret cried out, trying to grab my arm again, her voice shrill and panicked. We had an image to maintain in this town. We couldn't let Vanessa's wealthy family know we were struggling with the bills. We couldn't look poor. We thought you stole the ring, so we felt entirely justified in taking the money as a penalty. We are so sorry, Julian. An image to maintain, I repeated, tasting the absolute, putrid toxicity of those words on my tongue. You actively, intentionally destroyed your youngest son's future. You stole from an 18-year-old kid making minimum wage, just so you wouldn't look poor in front of your fake friends at the country club. You are the most morally bankrupt, disgusting people I have ever met in my entire life. I pushed my heavy wooden chair back slowly, the legs scraping loudly against the tile floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the shop. I stood up to my full height, towering over them, looking down at the absolute wreckage of my blood relatives. I buttoned my blazer smoothly, projecting total, unshakable control. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice carrying just enough volume for them to hear every single syllable with crystal clarity. You did not come here today because you love me. You did not come here because you missed me. You came here today because the massive guilt of your own horrific actions finally caught up with you, and you want me to absolve you. You want me to play the good, forgiving son so you can sleep comfortably at night without feeling like the monsters you actually are. I looked down directly at Richard, who was openly weeping silently. Keep your money. I make more in a month now than you do in a quarter. I don't need your help. I don't need your toxic legacy. And I absolutely, unequivocally do not forgive you. Julian, please don't do this, Garrison begged, looking up at me with panicked, desperate eyes, realizing his entire support system was gone. You are my brother. I am not your brother, I replied coldly, feeling nothing but apathy. I stopped being your brother the second you watched our father steal my money and you smiled. Do not ever contact me again. Do not email me. Do not show up at my apartment building. If any of you ever come near me or try to contact my employer, I will file a restraining order for harassment, and I will drag all of your dirty laundry into a public courtroom. I did not wait for a response. I did not wait for more tears. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the exit. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the coffee shop and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. The sunlight felt incredibly warm and pure on my face. Behind me, I heard the door fly open again. Julian, wait, please come back. Margaret screamed hysterically, her voice echoing loudly across the parking lot. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I kept walking at a steady, confident pace toward my car, leaving the burning wreckage of my former family exactly where it belonged, far, far behind me in the ashes. I reached my car, unlocked it with a click of the fob, and slid into the quiet sanctuary of the driver's seat. Before I even had the chance to insert the key into the ignition, my phone started vibrating violently in the inner pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. 5 missed calls from Garrison in the span of 30 seconds. Then came the text messages, flooding my screen in a rapid-fire, desperate barrage of emotional manipulation and panic. Garrison, you can't just walk away like that. We are family. You have to talk this out. Garrison, Mom is having a full-blown panic attack in the parking lot. She can't breathe. You need to come back here right now. Garrison, you are being incredibly selfish and cruel. We apologized. We offered you money. What more do you want from us? Garrison, answer the damn phone, Julian. Don't do this to us. I sat in the quiet, soundproof cabin of my car and read the messages one by one. 3 years ago, a barrage of angry, demanding texts like that from Garrison would have sent me into a severe spiral of anxiety. I would have rushed back into the coffee shop, apologizing profusely for making them upset, begging for scraps of their approval, terrified of being punished. But sitting there now, reading his frantic words, I felt absolutely nothing but mild disgust and profound exhaustion. He was still trying to use Margaret's fragile, manufactured emotional state to control my actions. He was still desperately trying to frame me as the villain, the selfish one, for simply refusing to accept their deeply toxic behavior. I did not reply. I opened my phone settings, went directly to his contact profile, and firmly hit block. I repeated the exact same process for Richard's email address and my mother's cell phone number. With 3 simple, decisive taps on a glass screen, I severed the last remaining digital tethers to my abusive past. The absolute power and finality of that block button was intoxicating. It was the ultimate assertion of my own boundaries and self-worth. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, heading back to the safety of the city. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time before turning onto the highway. I could clearly see Margaret leaning heavily against the side of their silver SUV, sobbing theatrically into Richard's shoulder, while Garrison aggressively paced back and forth across the asphalt, yelling furiously into his phone, likely leaving me another voicemail I would never hear. It was a pathetic, chaotic portrait of a broken kingdom. The next 6 months of my life were a period of intense, active, and sometimes painful healing. Shutting the door on them at the coffee shop was incredibly empowering, but it also opened up a massive vault of old wounds and deeply ingrained insecurities that required professional attention. I finally did something I should have done years ago, something I could finally afford with my salary. I sought professional therapy. I found a highly recommended clinical psychologist, Dr. Eris, who specialized specifically in family trauma, scapegoating, and narcissistic abuse recovery. Walking into her calm, softly lit office for the first time was deeply intimidating, but it was a decision that fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life. In our weekly sessions, Dr. Eris helped me systematically unpack decades of complex emotional manipulation. She gave me the clinical vocabulary to understand exactly what had happened to me, removing the heavy burden of self-blame I had carried since childhood. We discussed the specific family dynamics of the golden child and the scapegoat. Your parents, Julian, needed a psychological dumping ground for their own deep-seated insecurities and failures, Dr. Eris explained gently during one of our most intense breakthrough sessions. Garrison was the mirror they used to see their own imagined perfection and success. You, unfortunately, were the mirror they used to project all their flaws, anxieties, and negative traits. When the ring went missing, it was psychologically impossible for them to blame Garrison's fiancé, because doing so would mean acknowledging a massive, embarrassing flaw in their perfect narrative. So they automatically defaulted to the scapegoat. It was a reflex. You did not deserve it, Julian. It was never about your worth. It was entirely about their own deeply broken pathology. Hearing a highly educated medical professional validate my reality, confirm that I was not crazy or inherently bad, was like finally taking a full, deep breath of air after drowning for 26 years. I finally stopped carrying the heavy, agonizing burden of asking, why wasn't I good enough to be loved by my own parents? I finally understood that their sheer inability to love me was a reflection of their own brokenness, not my lack of value. While I was actively healing, thriving at work, and moving forward, my former family was rapidly and spectacularly imploding. I heard all the gritty, embarrassing details through Harrison, who still kept his ear to the ground in our hometown and loved sharing the gossip over beers. The devastating revelation at the coffee shop had been the fatal, unrecoverable blow to Garrison and Vanessa's perfect country club marriage. Garrison, whose entire massive ego was built on demanding absolute loyalty and projecting total perfection, could not handle the humiliating fact that his own wife had made a complete fool out of him. He could not process that she had boldly lied to his face while he waged a vicious war against his own brother on her behalf. According to Harrison, the arguments were legendary and highly public. They screamed at each other in their manicured front yard, in front of the entire HOA board. Vanessa's mask of fragile, delicate innocence was permanently gone, replaced by a vicious, defensive cruelty. She threw Garrison's controlling, narcissistic nature back in his face, publicly accusing him of being an emotional tyrant. Garrison accused her of destroying his family and ruining his reputation. Within 4 short months of our coffee shop meeting, Vanessa formally filed for divorce. She packed up her designer bags, left the house, and moved back into her parents' massive, gated estate. Because Vanessa came from old money, she hired a team of ruthless lawyers. She demanded aggressive alimony and tied up all of Garrison's assets, dragging him into a brutal, highly public legal battle that drained his bank accounts and completely humiliated Richard and Margaret in front of the country club elite they cared so much about. The gossip mill in the town turned against them. The perfect legacy had collapsed into a spectacular, financially devastating, embarrassing mess. Then, predictably, came the inevitable, pathetic attempt to drag me back into the rubble to save them. It was a rainy, miserable Tuesday evening in November, exactly the week of Thanksgiving. I had just returned to my secure apartment building after a long, successful day at the corporate office. I was standing in my warm kitchen, opening a bottle of red wine, when my intercom buzzed sharply. I pressed the video button, expecting a food delivery driver. Instead, the grainy, black-and-white security camera showed Garrison standing in the lobby. He must have slipped in behind another resident when the door opened. He looked absolutely terrible. The confident, arrogant, polished executive was completely gone. His expensive suit was wrinkled and wet from the rain. His hair was unkempt, and he had dark, heavy, exhausted bags under his eyes. He looked up at the camera, completely defeated, looking like a man who had lost everything. "Julian!" His voice cracked through the small, tinny speaker, sounding desperate. "Please, just let me up for 5 minutes. I need to talk to my brother. It's Thanksgiving this week. Mom is a total wreck. She won't stop crying. She won't get out of bed. My life is falling apart. The lawyers are taking everything. I need you." I stood in my kitchen, holding my glass of wine, and stared at the screen. 3 years ago, my heart would have bled for him. I would have instantly let him up, poured him a drink, and let him use me as a sounding board to fix his ruined life. I would have felt obligated to save him. But Dr. Eris had trained me well. I realized, looking at his desperate, rain-soaked face, that Garrison did not love me. He did not miss Julian the person. He missed Julian the punching bag. He missed the established dynamic where he was the superior, successful one and I was the grateful loser. With his marriage in ruins, his finances tied up in a lawsuit, and his parents humiliated, he desperately needed the family scapegoat to return so he could feel powerful again. He wanted me to come to Thanksgiving so they could play pretend, take a family photo, and artificially reconstruct their broken image to show the town they were still united. I leaned closer to the intercom microphone. I did not feel angry. I just felt a profound, distant sense of pity for the pathetic man standing in the lobby. "I told you never to contact me again, Garrison," I said, my voice completely flat, steady, and devoid of any emotional warmth. "You don't have a brother. Go home and fix your own mess. Julian, please. You can't just abandon your family when we are down," he yelled into the intercom, desperately resorting to guilt tripping. "You abandoned me when I was down," I replied simply, stating a cold, hard fact. "And I survived. I built an entire life. You will just have to figure it out yourself." I reached out and pressed the disconnect button, firmly cutting off the audio and the video feed. The screen went completely black. I took a sip of my wine, walked over to the large window, and looked out at the glowing city lights. My pulse was incredibly steady. My breathing was calm. I had successfully defended my fortress. They could not touch me anymore. 2 weeks after Garrison showed up uninvited at my building, my professional life took another massive, completely unprecedented leap forward, solidifying the new reality I had fought so hard to build. My relentless work at the warehouse facility, combined with my online education, had caught the serious attention of the top corporate executives at the regional headquarters. They had been quietly, closely monitoring my logistics restructuring program, carefully noting the millions of dollars I had saved the company in operational costs, reduced inventory loss, and streamlined shipping routes. I received a direct, unexpected phone call from the chief executive officer of the entire North American logistics division. He bypassed middle management entirely. He formally flew me out to their massive corporate headquarters in Chicago for a grueling, 3-day intensive interview process. I sat in glass boardrooms, pitched my supply chain strategies to the board of directors, and proved exactly what I was capable of. When I returned home to Ohio, I had a signed, binding contract in my leather briefcase. I had officially been offered the position of regional director of operations. It wasn't just a standard promotion. It was a massive catapult straight into the executive suite. The offer came with a life-changing base salary, lucrative company stock options, a generous 401k matching program, and a comprehensive, fully paid relocation package. I was moving to Chicago. I was leaving the state of Ohio, and every ghost that haunted it, entirely behind. The next month was an absolute blur of calculated, highly organized activity. I spent my days professionally transitioning my old operations manager role to my chosen successor, ensuring the warehouse ran smoothly after my departure. I spent my nights packing up my apartment into neat, perfectly labeled cardboard boxes. On my absolute final night in the city, the apartment was completely empty, save for a single folding chair and my small overnight bag. The large corporate moving trucks had already departed for Illinois earlier that afternoon. I stood in the exact center of the bare, echoing living room, holding a cheap cup of terrible instant coffee, listening to the quiet, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. I walked slowly through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing loudly against the bare hardwood floors. I thought back to the horrific, rainy night I was violently kicked out of my childhood home. I vividly remembered the freezing rain soaking through my thin jacket, the absolute paralyzing terror of having no money in my bank account, and the visceral, soul-crushing pain of realizing that the people who were biologically supposed to love and protect me viewed me as a disposable piece of trash. If you had told that terrified, desperate 26-year-old kid sleeping on a lumpy floral couch in a rundown apartment that 3 years later, he would be a highly respected corporate executive moving to a major metropolis to run a division, he would have thought you were absolutely insane. Standing in the quiet, peaceful apartment. A profound, life-altering realization washed over me. It was a thought that I would explicitly bring up in my final, tearful session with Dr. Eris before I moved. Being falsely accused of a felony, having my college funds stolen, and being thrown out onto the street was, without a shadow of a doubt, the most painful, traumatic experience of my entire life. It broke me down to the very studs. It shattered my trust in humanity and destroyed my youthful innocence. But it was also the absolute greatest, most valuable gift Richard, Margaret, and Garrison could have ever possibly given me. If they had never maliciously accused me, if they had simply found the ring the next day and apologized, I would have likely stayed in that deeply toxic house for years. I would have continued to blindly accept their subtle emotional abuse. I would have continued to play the designated role of the family scapegoat, the underachiever, the quiet kid bagging groceries and apologizing for simply taking up space. I would have let their narcissistic worldview dictate my worth and cap my potential. By aggressively throwing me out into the cold, they forced me to learn exactly how to build my own fire. They forced me to tap into a deep, hidden reservoir of strength, raw ambition, and sheer, unrelenting grit that I never, ever knew I possessed. They thought they were burying me. They wanted to destroy me so they could feel better about themselves. They didn't realize I was a seed, and they had just violently planted me in the exact dirt I needed to grow into something they could never control. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window one last time, looking down at the city streets that had served as my brutal training ground. I had arrived in this city broken, broke, and carrying the heavy label of a criminal. I was leaving here as a completely self-made man, a respected leader, and someone who knew exactly how to fiercely protect his own peace. I finished the last sip of my coffee, picked up my overnight bag, and walked out the door. I locked it behind me. I didn't look back. The next morning, I drove my car onto the massive interstate, pointing the hood west toward the skyline of Chicago. The sun was just starting to rise, casting brilliant, hopeful streaks of gold, pink, and orange across the vast horizon. I rolled the window down, letting the cool, fresh morning air rush into the cabin, messing up my hair. I turned the radio up, listening to a classic rock station, tapping my fingers rhythmically on the leather steering wheel. I didn't know exactly what the future held in Chicago. I knew there would be new professional challenges, new stressful corporate battles, and new personal obstacles to overcome. But for the very first time in my entire 29 years of existence, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was deeply, thoroughly excited. I had survived the absolute worst betrayal my own blood could throw at me. I had faced the darkest storm, and I had built a brick house that couldn't be blown down by their lies. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it. I was finally the author of my own life. I was in control of the narrative now. And that is where my story pauses for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredibly personal, painful, but ultimately triumphant journey. If there is one crucial thing I want you to take away from my experience, it is this: family is not just about shared DNA. Blood does not give anyone the right to abuse you, disrespect you, or treat you like a stepping stone for their own fragile ego. True family are the people who stand by you when the night is darkest, who believe in you when the world points fingers, and who celebrate your victories without a hint of jealousy. Never, ever be afraid to set hard, uncompromising boundaries to protect your peace and your future. You are worth so much more than being someone else's scapegoat. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from deeply toxic relatives to protect your own future and mental health? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your courage inspires me every day. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Until next time, stay strong, know your absolute worth, and keep building your own fire.